I was having a Zoom conversation yesterday, and this woman I was talking to was describing the great difficulty in how hard she is on herself. Maybe you can relate. But she's sharing with me the things that happen and her subsequent reaction and internal dialogue. And it's so incredibly unhelpful. And what's funny, because as we explored it, the question is like, okay, how long have you been saying that? How long have you been that hard on yourself? And has it ever worked? Has it actually ever helped you connect with what you're really looking for? And what are we ultimately looking for? It's an interesting question because in one way, we're looking for a space of relaxation. We're looking for a space that is the embrace of what we are. We're looking for a space where we can see ourselves as enough. And so fundamentally, what you're telling me, Mrs. Johnson, is that the way you're going to get to seeing yourself as enough is by repeatedly telling yourself that you're not enough, in hopes that one day you'll be enough. How's that going? How long have you been trying that? It's so important to see that it just doesn't work. Beyond just talking about it, but to have one of those holy shit moments. This isn't working. And likewise, we can draw the illustration where imagine this self that you keep talking down to is a child that comes to you who's scared and confused. Scared and confused of imaginary things, by the way, which is understandable, right? Imagine a child who thinks there's a monster in the closet comes to you terrified. How do you treat that child? Do you approach with understanding and compassion? Do you hold a space that allows the fear to relax? Or do you say, get out of here, I don't have time for that. I've got things to do, people to impress, objects to collect, images to maintain. What's the consequence of holding that kind of space for a child? Year after year after year. Maybe half of a lifetime. You see, and as we've traveled this road being so unkind to ourselves, there's a lot that gets repressed. There's a lot that's unmet. There's a lot that feels like it's not safe to be authentic. That it's not safe to express the sincerity of your fears. The sincerity of what might seem like inadequacy. The sincerity of all of these things, which is really just a doorway to surrender. And because we as human beings are so determined to not surrender, we're so determined to have control, make things how we think they should be, that anytime we even touch upon that doorway, we say no. That's not working. It's just so fascinating, the contrast in our human experience when you look at what we think is happening and what is really happening. Because here I am describing the presence of this moment, this sacred quality. And so often as we go about our humanness, we're just completely oblivious to it. We are adorably consumed by the mind's content, believing in our imagination, believing in our stories, anxious about tomorrow, sad about yesterday. And yet we're not recognizing the profundity of now. I mean, it's the classic example of, isn't it just amazing to be alive? Like, doesn't that blow your mind a little bit? Maybe we've come to this place of thinking it's normal. But in the same way, nobody understands how this is happening. It doesn't make any sense to the mind. But yet here we are having an experience of being alive. And yet contained in that experience is this capacity to fall into an enormous amount of grace. And maybe it's for the one who's seen that. Maybe it's for the one who has touched the depth of that love. Maybe it's a spiritual discovery for you. But to, again, it's recognizing the difference where we have everything that we fear in the mind, everything that seems to make living problematic. And yet beyond all that content, there's this nowness where there's nothing to be afraid of. There's this nowness that doesn't reject you in any way. There's this nowness that allows you to be. And isn't that interesting? Because the struggle in being human is the assumption that we're not allowed to be. Is the assumption that there's something real to fear. Is the assumption that there's some sort of demand outside of the demand that we put on ourselves. And we believe that. But yet, when you look, it's not really happening. It's fascinating because beyond all the stories of what we think we want, my goodness, so many stories. Not only of what we think we want, but how we think things should be. With an undertone of assumption that thinks life is making a mistake. That thinks life doesn't know what it's doing. And in this assumption, we violently try to control ourselves and control other people and control experiences, thinking it has to go this way and not that way. How exhausting. You know what? Again, look at this space of unconditional love. Do you see that this space isn't interested in controlling you? Isn't interested in you becoming this or becoming that? It doesn't need that from you. It already loves you. And that's a wild exploration for the human being. And let me tell you why. Because the human being has this conditioning that maybe we can call conditional love. The human being has been conditioned to believe that love is only given when conditions are met. We've been taught this. So much so that we look at ourselves and we say, "Dear self, I'll love you if you look a certain way. Dear self, I'll love you if you show up a certain way. I'll love you if you're smart enough. I'll love you if you don't look dumb. I'll love you if you don't make mistakes. I'll love you if you're certain. I'll love you if you know what you're doing. I'll love you if you don't fail. I'll love you if you love me. That's not love. Do you see in all of these conditions? I wonder if this is as profound to you as it is for me. But to recognize that conditional love, the love that says, I'll love you if, is a love that's saying, I don't love you right now. I'm telling you that I don't love you right now, and I will love you if. And a love that isn't love now isn't love. There's no future love, because that's an idea of love. That's in the imagination. It's not real. And you can see this in the unconditional love of a mother. And we can imagine that it's genuine. It's not, dear child, look how I want you to look and then I'll love you. It's not, dear child, don't make mistakes and I'll love you. What it is, dear child, I see you. I see what you really are. You're my child, and there's nothing that can change that. I love you because you're my child. Not because of this, not because of that, but because you are. And you see, what gets in the way practically for the parent and their love for their child that makes it conditional is the parents trying to use the child to satisfy the parent's inadequacy. And this plays itself out in so many ways. That says in some form or fashion, dear child, stop whining and then I'll love you, because when you're whining, it makes me think I'm a bad person. And so I'm going to be unkind to you as a way of manipulating you to be how I want you to be, so that I can feel like I'm lovable. And so I have a condition on myself. I have a condition that says, dear self, if your child isn't screaming, then I'll love you. How can I get my child to stop screaming? Dear self, if my child is successful in the world, then I'll love you. That's why it's so important to resolve these things, by the way. And all these things are innocent misunderstandings. They're little confusions in how we see ourselves, others in life. We are looking out through a filter that distorts the reality of love, because we think we know what love is, but love is so beyond our ideas about it. And I'm not trying to create an expectation that says you should be unconditionally loving. That would be a condition. If anything, I'm almost pointing to the impossibility of your humanness being unconditionally loving, and seeing that that's okay. That too is loved. The misunderstanding is understood. The confusion is seen. There's an immensity of compassion for the fear. You see, it's not so much that the human become unconditionally loving. It's to see that life already is. and you can use the word God there. You see, it's not that you should become God. It's that you should see that God is. It's not that you should become the controller in life, but to see that life is already under control. And when this is seen, there's a profound relaxation that emerges. You know what? As an example, when you can see that your inability to be unconditionally loving is loved, then when you find yourself loving conditionally, it's very easy to let that go and learn from it and move on. But when you judge yourself for having conditions, do you see the mess you make? It's like you put an impossible expectation on yourself. Again, it's like you have an expectation that you should be God, which is not going to happen. You have an expectation on yourself that you should know everything that life knows. That's not reasonable. This is what I love about the sacred relationship between the human being and God. Call it source, call it universe, whatever. But the recognition that there is an aspect of what we are that is intimately intertwined with that which touches everything. And so we can have our human experience while also knowing that it's held. And again, this invites a softness in our human experience. It invites a gentleness. It invites a permission to make mistakes, which is also a permission to learn. It invites permission to fail, which invites a permission to succeed. It invites permission for the whole experience, because the whole experience is loved, because love is unconditional. Look at what makes it more problematic. It's the idea that love is conditional, which is also like saying something's unforgivable. That's a whole nother episode. I find great solace in a playful quality found within unconditional love. It's almost like, look at it this way. Look at it this way. The space of right now, the container that we're in, it doesn't take anything seriously. The only thing that gets interpreted as serious is the mind interpreting something as serious, which is fine. You're free. You can do that. But the seriousness doesn't exist outside of your belief in something being serious. The space of now just holds it all, whatever it is. There's no restriction. There's no capturing. There's no resistance. It's all just held. Which is also like saying there's nothing that's feared. Because for there to be that agitation of seriousness, there has to be an element of fear. And in a space that's unconditionally loving, that space is not fearing anything. That space isn't even fearing fear. Meaning that if you show up with fear, unconditional love is not afraid of your fear. This is partly because unconditional love knows there's nothing to be afraid of. And so if you're afraid, love is not afraid of your fear. It's held. It's allowed. Which is exactly why you can show up in this moment and completely admit that you're terrified. And that's okay. Which is so classic. And this is the work that I do with talking to people. They bring to me what they're afraid of. And in some way, I find a way to show them that they don't need to be afraid of that. They can, and it's okay. But the more we look at it, the more we unwrap it, we see that we're imagining things that aren't really there. And it's so beautiful to see this because it's simply our mind getting captured temporarily. Our mind is getting captured temporarily in the belief that there are monsters in the closet. But yet, if we walk up to the door together and look in the closet, what we see is that the things we imagine are in there aren't really in there, which is kind of like the experience of the fear of rejection. We could be paralyzed with a fear of rejection. And the more we look at what we think is happening, we see that it's not really happening, which is like saying it doesn't mean what you think it means. Oh, they didn't text me back. They rejected me. Is that what happened? Is that what it means? Or is that just what you're interpreting? Is that what you're imagining that it means? Where does that come from? Why would you choose that interpretation over something else? You see, there's this invitation to be still for a moment and see that there are these patterns of misunderstanding that are just constantly interpreting our experience in a way that's completely and adorably insane. And these interpretations are creating so much restriction unnecessarily that doesn't allow us to just be present and let life be life. Like the example of someone not texting you back, to interpret that as rejection, good luck relaxing about it. But to acknowledging the reality that you don't know, meaning you don't really know why they didn't text you back. And even if they said, I didn't text you back because I hate you, you can see that that's not really about you. You don't know what's going on with them. You don't know what your interaction brought up for them, what it reminded them of about their past. Why are you taking that on? Can we not just let them have their experience? Which is very, very difficult to do when you want things from other people, like love. Do you ever notice this? This is fascinating. The more you want love from someone, you're unconsciously looking for where it's lacking. The more you want love from someone, the more your focus is determined to find where it's not showing. Because the nature of wanting something is a declaration that it's not here. And so you're looking for where it's not here as you want it. To want love from another person is to misunderstand the nature of love. You don't get love from another person. That would imply that you're missing love. That would imply that love is limited. that would imply that what you are is not love. Which, in another way of speaking, would imply that you're separate from God. It's not true. It's an innocent misunderstanding. And alas, this is the journey we're all on, to remember these things, to remember the truth of our own nature, the reality of what we are, clarifying generations of misunderstandings, looking into all the dark places and seeing that there's nothing really there to be afraid of. That's the adventure. And you're perfectly allowed to go on that adventure, even if it's a scary adventure, because life knows there's nothing real to fear. You see, this is why, in one way, it looks like a cosmic shit show, where everything is just released into the wild. Holy shit. What is vast polarity? You've got things to the extreme on this end and on this end, exploring all manner of experience. And in every direction, no matter which road you travel on, if you're paying attention, it all points back to the truth of what you are. It all points back to seeing yourself, others, and life more clearly. And the more you're open to see that, the easier it is to travel the road. The easier it is. Doesn't mean it's easy, but the easier it is. Because, again, what adventure is a worthwhile adventure if it's easy? That's not adventure. No, real adventure is going to challenge the boundary of your comfort zone. It's required. Once you know it's required, that you're going to have to go on an adventure, then you open up to that adventure. And when you open up to that adventure, you actually start learning quite rapidly. However, if you hide from the adventure, if you turn away from the adventure, you're saying, I don't want to see the lessons in this adventure. And then we grow, but painfully slow. Open up, fear less, love more. You see, the only conditions that we have to love are wrapped around the things that we fear. But the more we see that there's nothing to fear, or there's less to fear, then this is what allows for more love to be seen, which is why on your adventure, you're constantly encountering the things you fear. Why do you keep encountering the things that you fear? So you can look at them and see that they're not what you think they are, and that you don't need to be afraid of them. And what happens if you are not afraid of them? There's more love that flows. Hasn't that been your journey so far? Encountering things you're scared of, and then hiding from them, delaying looking at them. And sooner or later you realize, I have to face this. I have to look at it. And then what do you find? It's not what I thought it was. Yeah, That's the one lesson that you will experience in 1,000 different ways. You encounter what you fear, you contract, then you get to a point where you can't breathe, and you have to move through the fear. And it's like a big, sweet exhale. And then you do it all over again. And as you travel and explore all these little fears, moving your way through them, it just opens the aperture and lets more light in, which is love.